This week's video is sponsored by Hit Point Press and their massive Black Friday sale. Hello and welcome to Monster of the Week, the only show on the internet that investigates old school RPG monsters and converts them into 5th edition D&D so that their legacy might live on. This week's monster can be your Angle or your Devil, because it's kind of both. The Concordant killer does indeed possess DNA from both sides of the multiversal spectrum, and as always, my goal this week is to go over just what makes them so interesting. I'm talking lore, ecology, publication history, plot hooks, and of course some brand new 5th edition D&D monster stats. So, get ready for a collision of worlds and some questionable moral choices, because this week's monster is truly ambivalent towards good and evil. The Concordant killer got its start in the year 2006 as part of the Monster Manual 4, printed as part of Dungeons & Dragons 3.5. This is personally one of my favorite D&D bestiaries that's ever gone to print, because all the monster entries are so fleshed out in comparison to anything else from 3rd, 4th, or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Every creature, of course, has all the staples we've come to expect from our monster manuals. You've got stats, cool artwork, and a brief summary of what the creature's deal is. But this book also includes strategies and tactics the monsters might use, along with a sample encounter you could easily throw at your adventuring party. Not to mention the ecology section, which is way more extensive than what we're used to seeing. Typically only dragons or other really important monsters get this kind of treatment in other monster manuals, so it's really cool to see just your generic kind of slime guy get a whole ecology entry. And there's even a little lore section that tells you some fun facts about the monster's in-game lore with corresponding knowledge-based DCs, so your characters can try to make those skill checks and see what they might know about the monster standing directly in front of them. I know some people out there might not care about all the extra fluff, but this is the kind of stuff I live for. I mean, I literally made an entire YouTube channel about this exact thing. There are even some monster entries in this book that include a mini dungeon complete with a map that shows you what an example of that creature's lair could look like. Plus, just look at that cover art. Some might say it's a little cheesy. Personally, I really like it. Anyways, my personal feelings about this book aside, on page 35 of this lovely little book is where we find the Concordant killer. Whoa, look who just walked straight out of Devil May Cry. This red-winged man you see here is technically neither an angel nor a demon, but something in between. In a move I can only assume Dan Brown would approve of, the Concordant killer possesses DNA from both angels and demons in order to become a being of pure ambivalence. And how that happens is kind of wild.
What makes a man turn neutral? Lust for gold? Power? Or were you just born with a heart full of neutrality?
Before you get too excited, I apologize, their origin story does not include any hot angel on demon action. At least, not canonically. While one half of the Concordant killer's DNA is derived from the demons of the Abyss, and the other half comes from the lawful good celestials of Mount Celestia, there's really nothing sexy about how they come to be. Basically, an ancient god of neutral alignment performed some kind of messed up ritual to fuse the two energetically opposed essences together into a being of pure neutrality. Specifically, which god, on which plane of existence, and for what reason, we don't really know. We only have myths and legends to work from. But it's the best guess of scholars that the Concordant killers were first created in order to serve as bodyguards to whichever god created them. It's also believed that their creator is long dead, so I guess the whole bodyguard thing didn't really work out, now did it? Which is honestly kind of shocking, because Concordant killers are extremely powerful and have abilities that were literally designed to kill creatures from other planes. You know, just the kind of stuff a god might consider a threat. But putting a pin in that for a moment, as immortal beings, with the death of their creator deity, they didn't simply just vanish. They were still hanging around limbo or wherever, and now They had no primary directive, no governing force to dictate what they were supposed to be doing. So, naturally, they turned to the mercenary lifestyle. After all, they are well-equipped cosmic beings who are effectively designed to kill powerful creatures, so any deity, demigod, archfiend, or other ruling cosmic being would be so lucky to have them fighting on their side. So, that's essentially what they do. They contract their services out to whoever wants to pay them, and in turn they turn their sword in the direction their employer commands. They have no qualms about killing angels, demons, elementals, aberrations, or anything else for that matter. And they're really good at it. Like, really good. I mean, the word killer is literally in their name, so it would be kind of embarrassing if they were shit swordsmen. But they don't simply take on contracts just for something to do. The overall society of Concordant killers does have an agenda. They see themselves primarily as keepers of the great balance of the multiverse. They believe that any faction, no matter who it is, becoming too powerful is ultimately not a good thing for the whole of existence. So in order to preserve what they see as the natural order of the planes, they take jobs for factions they see as needing a boost. Basically, they act as a thumb on the scale of cosmic balance whenever they feel any one entity or faction is overreaching in terms of their influence. In order to ensure that everything goes to plan, they meet every so often near the central spire of the Outlands, which is a place that impedes the magic of even the most powerful deities. During these meetings, they discuss the state of the multiverse and decide on which contracts they'll take up in the coming years. Think of it like a quarterly business meeting, but for half angel, half demon mercenaries. There isn't much more information given to us here, but I imagine that they have some kind of stronghold somewhere that acts as sort of a knight's keep where they gather. Or maybe they just meet in an open field. I truly don't know because we're never given that information, but I like to think that they congregate in a secret base of some kind, just because that seems cool. Also, for those of us not playing D&D in the Forgotten Realms, I imagine they would generally choose to make their home in any location that is well and far away from the influence of any god's reach. The one exception to that maybe being if you're playing in Theros. I could see these guys getting real buddy-buddy with Clothis, but I'm not even going to start to get into that, otherwise we'll be here all day. God, I love Theros, it's such a good setting. Now when it comes to payment for these mercenary contracts, obviously they have little to no interest in gold or trinkets. So, in lieu of currency, they will accept payment in the form of favors. Sometimes the favor offered to them is something they want right away, but usually it ends up being more of an IOU kind of situation, with the understanding that the Concordant killer will cash in an owed favor at some point in the future, and the payee will indeed hold up their end of the bargain. So what kind of things might they ask for? Truly, the sky is the limit when you're dealing with deities bestowing favors and boons. It might be something as simple as the use of a powerful magical artifact, or leaving a planar portal open for the killers to use at a later date, or maybe even granting them some information about another potential target, or simply just asking a god to look the other way when the killers are operating within their domain. Whatever the favor actually ends up being, the vast majority of cosmic beings are happy to pay it, as the services of a Concordant killer are well worth the price. Also, since they're in such high demand, Concordant killers usually end up being pretty selective about the contracts they take, so unless it's worth their while, they are very unlikely to be swayed into service. But that highly selective nature has helped them garner a reputation as reliable and deadly dealers of death. Somewhat unrelated, but it is also worth mentioning that they can't reproduce in any way. So while there may be thousands or even tens of thousands of them out there, every time one of them dies, it is a loss to the species that will never recover. As such, they tend not to take too kindly to one of their kin being felled. So whenever one of them does die in battle, usually a group of them will gather to achieve vengeance on that enemy. This is interesting to me because Concordant killers are pretty much all business. They embody that vibe of true neutrality and logic. But this does seem to be the one time they allow their emotions to get the better of them. There is also probably some kind of logical argument you could make to justify this behavior, but I guess that's between them and the gods. Now, with all that said, there is one oddity, let's say, when it comes to this creature's publication history. They may have gotten their start in 3.5, but they were also reprinted in 4th edition, sort of. I've talked about this book on the channel before, and it's just really weird. Published in 2009, Open Grave is all about undead creatures and the lore surrounding them. And despite the fact that they are definitely not an undead creature, the Concordant Killer is in this book. And look at that. In this book, they are undead. Okay. And while they did use the exact same artwork for its entry here, the fact that it's undead isn't the only thing that changed. For one, they completely altered the name of the creature, redubbing it Discord Incarnate. They also revamped the lore to fit more with the 4th edition Dawn War narrative, which is honestly just a whole can of worms I'm not going to get into today. But the Cliff Notes version is that when a cosmic being of good, like a Koat, or some kind of angel is battling against a being of evil, like a demon, if they manage to kill each other in the struggle, sometimes their essence would fuse into a concordant, I mean a Discord Incarnate. This lore is a bit less compelling in my opinion, but I didn't want to leave it unmentioned because who knows, this might be just the thing some of you are looking for, and if that's the case, 4E's got your back. I do just have to say though, the name is wild to me. Discord Incarnate would seem to imply that it is a chaotic creature. Like if this was a creature of pure chaos, that would make sense. I think they're trying to imply that like because it's two different essences that don't necessarily meld properly together, so there's internal discord happening. That's possible, but I don't know. I think it's a bad name. Anyways, back to the interesting version of this monster. Now that you've got a good idea of what the Concordant Killer is, and you've heard me talking up their combat prowess, I think it's high time that we took a look at what they're actually capable of when swords are drawn. Back in the days of 3.5 D&D, alignment was much more important to how we played the game than it is now. To contrast that with 5th edition D&D, I've literally run entire campaigns where the question of alignment never came up even once. For the record, this is something I actually prefer, I think, but it did make converting this creature's abilities a little bit challenging. As these agents of true neutrality, they used to get attack bonuses and various benefits based on the alignment of the creature they were fighting. This was mostly meant to convey that they were equally capable of fighting evil aligned creatures such as devils as they were good aligned creatures like angels. And of course that spilled over into encounters against player characters where, again, alignment mattered a lot more because there were certain spells and resistances and weapons that you could or couldn't use depending on what your alignment was. And we still see echoes of that in 5th edition, but again, I've literally seen character sheets where the alignment spot was just left blank before. So in order to make the Concordant Killers a bit more in line with 5th edition design philosophy, rather than just have their abilities target specific alignments, I adjusted them to target specific creature types. I used the spell Protection from Good and Evil as a sort of blueprint here, because that spell used to work a little bit differently in 3rd edition, and the way it was updated to 5th edition makes pretty good sense to me. But again, putting a pin in that for a second. Clocking in with a challenge rating of 18, the Concordant Killer certainly means business. And while they are extremely powerful, all things considered, their stat block is actually pretty straightforward for a creature of this power level. They are large creatures with an armor class of 19, and they are straight up immune to acid, cold, lightning, fire, and poison damage. They've got a 90-foot fly speed, and they are gifted with true sight, so they can see through any magical skullduggery. As I mentioned though, they're completely designed from the ground up to kill creatures that occupy the outer planes. And how might they achieve that goal? Well, it's a bit of a three-pronged approach. And the first prong is a defensive one. They have a permanent protection from evil and good spell cast on them at all times. This means that any aberrations, celestials, elementals, fae, fiends, or undead all have disadvantage on attack rolls made against the Concordant Killer. That's pretty good. It also means they can't be charmed, frightened, or possessed by those creatures. And that brings us to our second prong, which is a bit more pointy and comes in the shape of a greatsword. Their +2 Concordant Greatsword attack deals 4d6 plus 8 damage, which is a pretty worrisome stab to be on the receiving end of, no doubt. But if the target of that sword attack is an aberration, celestial, elemental, fae, fiend, or undead, the attack deals an additional 4d8 force damage. Altogether, that's an average of 40 damage per swing if the target is one of those things I said, and it gets 2 strikes per turn. And that brings us to its third prong, which is all about battlefield control, and that is the killer's ability to cast spells. It can innately cast a bunch of spells, not the least of which are Dispel Magic, Resilient Sphere, Banishment, Wall of Force, Force Cage, and Mind Blank. These spells are going to be used regularly by the Concordant Killer to isolate its enemies and try to split up their numbers. Ideally, it would just fight its opponent one-on-one, but if it has to use magic to try and make that happen, it'll happily do so. You would be shocked at how effective a well-placed Wall of Force can actually be. But possibly its most commonly used spell is Greater Invisibility. This allows it to be completely unseen until something forces it to drop concentration, or the spell just runs out after a minute. So at the end of the day, the Concordant Killer is simply a brutal and effective melee combatant with a slew of spells to make it so that it can get in close and do what it needs to do a lot easier. And hey, if all else fails, it can always teleport next to its enemy. Something else kind of interesting about this creature, though, is the fact that it's actually less effective against players than it would be at fighting most other monsters. I mean, sure, maybe you have an undead or a fae creature in the party, and if that's the case, it sucks to be them. But I would say for the vast majority of adventuring parties out there, its unique attributes aren't likely to be a problem due to the fact that in following with the way 5th edition treats alignment, its abilities would now target creature types. But if you happen to use alignment as a core mechanic at your table and it's heavily embedded with all of your characters and your world, definitely feel free to have its abilities function against any creature without a true neutral alignment, because that's how they used to work. Rather than targeting various creature types, just if you didn't have a base neutral alignment, you were gonna get some extra damage coming your way. But I think overall, targeting the specific types of creatures is a bit more elegant, and honestly, it adds kind of a neat twist to this creature. But I suppose that brings us to the first potential way we might actually use this monster. So let's build some encounters and talk about a few. There are so many ways this creature can be employed, and that, at the end of the day, is really what made me want to make a video about them. For starters, the fact that a group of players from the material plane can potentially avoid the negative effects of their natural properties immediately made me think of something. Let's say that a deity, demigod, archfiend, or some other kind of powerful being is being actively hunted by a Concordant Killer. That's obviously really bad for them. But knowing a powerful party of adventurers from the material plane might have a better chance at actually killing it. Perhaps this cosmic being offers the party some kind of favor or vast amount of wealth if they are willing to kill the Concordant Killer that's after this cosmic being. That's just a cool setup, in my opinion, for a combat encounter, and because the Concordant Killer is intelligent and quite powerful, it might not end up being just a simple combat. They might have to track it down first, racing against the clock to try to outfox a literal cosmic assassin. And if they succeed, whatever reward from this powerful being they receive could very well lead into the next part of an adventure. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, Concordant Killers are extremely vengeful, so the party might just find themselves on the hit list if word of their exploits makes it back to the rest of the gang. Also, pulling out a pin from something we talked about earlier, when it comes to how the creator deity of these like super bodyguards died, Maybe the Concordant killers were actually the one who killed their creator deity. Perhaps the very act of creating the Concordant killers ended up tipping the scales too far in that entity's favor, which by their very nature caused the Concordant killers to want to kill them. And if that's true, then it means they're not necessarily above killing each other if one of them ever steps out of line. So, I don't know, maybe you team up with a group of Concordant killers to kill another Concordant killer who has gotten too powerful and big for their own britches and sort of stepped away from the path of balance. Which I guess evokes the idea that a Concordant killer doesn't necessarily have to be an antagonist. In a plane hopping campaign at high or even mid-level, a Concordant killer could make for a really neat NPC to interact with. As I said, maybe they're working alongside them on some kind of mission, either with a group of them against one of their own, or just some other deity that the party is also aligned with. Maybe if there's a cleric in the party, their god entreats the party to help a Concordant killer take down a powerful demon or something. Even at low level, the party might just have to deal with the demon's cultists to create an opening for the Concordant killer to come in and do what it does best. Or maybe the party finds themselves in possession of a powerful magic item that the Concordant killer wants. Maybe it's willing to do a job for them and they become the contractors in exchange for this powerful magic item. Or maybe it agrees to do some kind of favor for them early on in the campaign when the players are still relatively low level, with the promise of a future favor. Then of course the killer shows up 15 levels later, seeking to cash in on that favor in some way. And the players might not like what's being asked of them. And if they choose not to do it, they might have to actually fight the Concordant killer, or maybe it just takes them to Cosmic Court and they have to deal with Primus judicating their situation. And of course, if the party ever manages to piss off a cosmic entity for one reason or another, maybe they themselves become the targets of a Concordant killer. Yeah, gang, sorry, but that archfiend you banished back to the 9 hells a few sessions ago isn't too happy about the whole situation, so he hired this guy to find and kill you. However you choose to use this creature though, one thing is certain, and that is that I have no strong feelings one way or the other. One thing I do have strong feelings about though is this week's sponsor, Hit Point Press. Black Friday has come early to Hit Point Press. There are tons of site-wide discounts and a whole bunch of new products, just in time for the holiday season. No, not yet. Wait until December 1st. But you know what can't wait? These savings. There are discounts on Humblewood, animated spells, Griffin Saddlebag, the deck of many reference cards, miniature STLs, and more. And while you're there, be sure to pick up your own copy of Fablemaker's animated tarot deck, the new Series 2 animated spell decks, and try out a free download of the Shift Quick Start Beta, a brand new RPG system which is currently in development. And you can use code BF2022 at checkout to get an additional 5% off orders over $50. So definitely check out the sale happening right now at hitpointpress.com. The link is in the description below. So thank you all so much for watching, and a special thank you to all the lovely patrons out there who support the channel over on Patreon. As always, if you do want to use this monster, linked in the description down below as well is a Google document which contains all the stats and lore and tidbits about this creature so that you can bring it to your 5th edition table as is. And if you're a patron over on the Patreon page, you will of course find the Dungeon Dad exclusive high-res PDF document, which contains all the same information, but it's got the cool artwork and stuff there and gives you something that you can bring to the game table with a little pizzazz. Also, it helps me consume food, which is great. And speaking of Patreon, it is time for Patron of the Week. This week's randomly selected patron is Legion. According to Google, I should be thanking all 3,000 to 6,000 of you, so thank you, folks. I appreciate the support. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. I had a ton of fun making it. This creature I thought was going to be a much shorter episode than there ended up being a ton of stuff to unpack. I believe this monster was recommended by a few different people, so for the folks who recommended this creature, thank you so much. It ended up being a really cool monster to cover. Also, we're coming up on PAX Unplugged this year, so if you are planning on attending PAX Unplugged at the beginning of December, look for me there. I will be wearing one of 2 ridiculous outfits depending on the day. If you see me down there dressed as a dungeon master or wearing a full suit of patterned Pokemon, come on over and tell me what your favorite monster is. Let's chat. I'm going to be doing interviews with attendees, with presenters, with all kinds of people. And hopefully we'll get some cool... And hopefully we'll get some cool and fun videos out of that whole situation that'll go up on the channel as editing allows. I don't know when that's gonna happen, but hopefully by the end of the year, I'll be able to get all that content uploaded and edited and all that stuff for you guys. So if you can't make it to PAX, you can look forward to seeing whatever shenanigans me and the crew can get up to. Also, I guess I didn't mention this earlier, but yeah, if there is a monster from an older version of D&D or any other role-playing game for that matter that you would like to see show up on the channel, definitely feel free to leave a comment and let me know, or go over to the Discord, which is linked down below. We have a monster suggestions channel over there where you can drop your suggestions in, and regardless of where you make your suggestion, it will be added to the monster suggestions Google document, which I look at whenever I want to cover a new monster. But I think that's pretty much everything I've got to say today. Once again, thank you guys. I appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next one. Till then.
All I know is my gut says maybe.